Another thing I'll call the Christians out on, they call the Bible the Word, and they say it's the Word of God. And you know, you got that passage in Ephesians where it talks about putting on all the armour of God, righteousness in the Word, on all that kind of thing. And then the sword of the Lord, which is the Word, they will say. And then they'll hold up their Bible as they do it. It's idolatry, mate. You're making out that a physical object is divine, or is the only divinity. But the Word was with God in the beginning, as it says in John. I don't think the Bible was around in the beginning. It took a good couple of thousand years to write. Oh, I'm bloody lost. You know, I'll go back a bit. Where am I? I don't know. The Bible refers to itself as the Scriptures, and that's what it does. And these Christians, they treat the Bible in exactly the same way that the Muslims treat the Quran. Now, the Muslims say that the Quran was not just divinely inspired. They say that Muhammad was told what to write down, and that the exact words he wrote down were the exact words of God, and any interpretation or translation would falsify it. The Christians say they believe differently. They believe that the Scriptures were God-breathed or God-inspired. All well and good. I believe that too. But I also believe that of every single thing. You know, all these trees, every word I say, every word you say, everything is God-breathed, God-inspired. That's where it's all coming from. But let's just say, let's separate out, let's just play their game, and let's separate out the Bible and say, okay, the Bible was God-breathed, and He inspired men with the truth, and then they wrote it. And man's fallible, and he can make mistakes. So, but the way Christians treat the Bible is exactly the same way that the Muslims treat the Quran. And I mean, you can call a chicken a fish if you want, but if it's got feathers and it clucks, guess what? It ain't a fish, mate. It ain't. So they would not allow a kind of interpretation that could possibly resolve contradictions. So Paul in Corinthians, he says explicitly, all things are lawful to me, but not all things are expedient. And he explicitly states his freedom. But he also says things about how sodomites and all that kind of thing aren't going to get into the kingdom of heaven. He says things which seem to be saying that the law is still in operation. Now, why would he say that? Well, how can you resolve that contradiction? You can't resolve it from within the text. And that's why most arguments of Christians, you just end up creating a massive list of verses that contradict each other, because they don't recognise the Bible as a social creation, you know, a social construct, something created from humans interacting with each other. And so Paul was living in a certain situation. He couldn't just come out and say you can do whatever you want. He couldn't just come out and say the law was crap. He couldn't do that, because he had a motive and intention, and he talks about this in Romans. He wished that all the Jews would be saved from the coming destruction. That's what he was trying to do. And the thing is, if you preach this message to somebody, you've got to be as wise as a serpent, but subtle as a dove, or peaceful as a dove, you know, as harmless as a dove. And so Paul, as he said, he's all things to all men, you know, to those under the law as if I'm under the law, to those without the law as if I'm without the law. He was all things to all men. And these letters, they could have been caught in transit, and then they could have been used to attack the Christians, because the Jews still had power. They were running the legal system. And so if the Christians were explicitly antinomian, it used to be a cuss word in the early church, antinomian, like a kind of insult, but it's actually what the gospel is. It is antinomian. Antinomian just means like no law. He had to be sly, and also like these Christians, and that's why Paul would he would talk about how there's been said amongst the Jews that we should sin so that grace may abound. And that's a logical, if you're still thinking in terms of sin and good and evil, that's what it would sound like that he was saying. But he was saying there is no sin, and it's like, are you gonna actually try and fail? You can't try and fail, because if you try and fail, when you actually fail, you succeeded. Simple. If you try and sin and you sin, you went sinned by definition. So yeah, good stuff, isn't it? Good stuff. You wouldn't have thought it would be in the Bible, and I can draw it. Me and my friend Inner Standing later on today, I hope, are going to start going through the Bible and bringing out all the non-duality in it and the freedom in it and the message. Really, non-duality isn't so much a conceptual belief, it's a kind of place you come to of sort of being okay with everything, and free, and it's defined by more of a kind of perspective, not so much a discrete set of like definitions or whatever. It is that, phew, the weight's off my shoulders, you know, I can just rest and be. Freedom, it's defined by all those kinds of things, and it's defined, depends on who you talk to really, but if you talk to me, that's what I define it as. Goodbye.